Welcome back to the Daily Memphians Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Drew Hill, joined as always by Chris Herrington. It's another week for the Memphis Grizzlies, another week closer to the NBA draft. We have a lot to discuss, Chris. First, off the top, I think we did work out some of the technical difficulties with the podcast, not all of them. We're still working to get our Spotify feed back to the original place. You can still watch us on Spotify and listen to us on Spotify. It's just on a new feed. So if you're getting this podcast somewhere else, be on the lookout for that. We'll continue to try to get that fixed. But other than that, I think it's been mostly smooth sailing. We have plenty to get into. The two of us both took some time to write about the Ja Morant situation last week, so we can get further into that. You proposed some trades, which I think people like. And there's some other speculation, I guess, that exists around the Grizzlies and that. I have some things I'd like to say on some of that. And then you had a top 35 prospect list that you put out. I have my own list. I'm shuffling still, and so I want to go through your list of 35 players and discuss some of that and talk about sort of the tiers that you made and where some of the prospects fall. So we'll get into that, as well as an NBA Finals that's taking place. The Knicks have a 2-0 lead. Game 2 was highly entertaining. And listener questions, which we have not taken in a long time. I was scanning them this morning, and some of them are pretty difficult. So we'll see how that goes. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, let's go.
Let's go. So we both wrote about...
Or as Tony Allen would say, let go.
Let go. We both wrote about Ja Morant last week, and I think my column was more so kind of a why we're in this situation, where it feels like the Grizzlies are going to try to trade Ja Morant again and what might be the reasoning behind trying to trade Ja Morant. And yours was more so... into the nitty-gritty, into the weeds with some potential trades. And so can we just backtrack? Because, I mean, I'm sure you have thoughts on why it would make sense for the Grizzlies to do a Ja Morant trade. So can we just backtrack to my column first, and then we'll get into some of your trades?
Yeah.
I think when it comes down to the Ja Morant situation, there's a few things here. I mean, one is that there's the strained relationship that has continued to exist, and some of the hurdles that they've tried to get over in the latter half of last season that now leads into this summer. The fact that the team publicly put him available for a trade, it appeared, at the trade deadline, and sort of how that kind of put him in a bad spot to have to answer some of the questions. And, there were at times that it felt standoffish, between Ja and us, who were the people that were asking him about his future with the team. And so it all kind of leads back to one place, though, which is that teams choose direction, and then they make trades based on that direction.
That's right.
And the Grizzlies' direction seems to be already in place. They traded Desmond Bane for a ton of draft assets. They traded Jaren Jackson for a ton of draft assets. Those suggest, and it's been said multiple times by Zach Kleiman, that the Grizzlies are going to pivot to a rebuild. They're going to move to a younger team. They're going to, try to, start from more of a baseline, although they do have some pieces in place, and try to build this team out from there. And so there's what the Grizzlies are saying, and then there's just logic behind the situation, which is that, if you were to keep Ja on the roster, he would be more of an aging player, not old, but approaching his 30s by the time some of the younger players and these players that we think are key pieces like Cedric Coward and Zach Edey would be approaching their second contracts. Do you just have any general thoughts on why a Ja trade would happen for the Grizzlies right now?
Yeah, and honestly, I wrote them all in February.
Yeah,
this is over. It is over in every way except for the actual relocation of Ja Morant, which is what's made it awkward. The word you use, direction, is the key word here. And Zach Kleiman said a lot of public things that are notable, but the one that to me is the most pertinent to this is when he said, when asked about, the reports that they were trying to trade Ja Morant, in February. He did not dispute those reports, of course. He just said, look, this is not about Ja Morant. It's about franchise direction. Now, at some point, when you rewind it back, the decision they made about franchise direction is about Ja Morant, right? That's why they made that decision. But once that decision was made, it's not really about that anymore. It's not about, there may be fans agonizing about the departure of Ja Morant, and that's understandable. There may be fans wondering about it. The team is just past that. They haven't said that, but they're just past that. They've already made that decision. They would not have traded Jaren Jackson Jr. at the trade deadline if they had not already decided they were moving on from Ja Morant. The problem was they couldn't find a deal that they were willing to do with Ja Morant, and they had to push it into the summer. And we don't know whether they'll find one this summer. But the decision to move forward to a new direction, to a younger build without Morant, has already been made. The team is not struggling and agonizing about whether they should trade Ja Morant. They made that decision. It's just a matter of the execution is problematic because his value is not in the same place that the Desmond Bane and the Jaren Jackson Jr. values were.
I wrote a little bit about how, in my opinion, it's very possible that optically this trade could be viewed as regrettable, come a year from now. Because if you go look at Ja's last season, and yeah, he did not play a lot of games. It's true he didn't attack the basket as much as he has in the past. He definitely did not shoot it as well as he has in the past. But it was in a minimal set of games, and it was around a different type of team. And I think it's certainly possible that if you decided to trade Ja Morant, you may end up in a situation where he excels somewhere else and really bounces back and looks like this star player that we saw in 21, 22, or, at that stage of his career. And you're going to say, we gave up that guy, and for what? Like, we didn't get much of a return back for that type of player.
Right.
And while that makes sense, I think you also just have to think about the future of the team and where things stand contract-wise as well, right? You can take it from here, but I don't think that a Ja extension would line up very well with what they already have on the table.
That's a key point. I was going to get to that. I don't. Now I got off track because there was a point I was going to make about something specifically you said, and I can't remember. But there's something you wrote in your column that I think is important to this. I don't disagree with it, but I think I agree a little bit differently than the way you wrote it, and that was the question of timeline. The timeline not matching up. I think it's true that the timeline no longer matches up. I don't think that's because of age. I don't think age is the problem with the timeline. I think a 27-year-old player as a key piece with Zach Edey and Cedric Howard, and even a 19-year-old Cameron Boozer, I actually think is fine. The problem is that Ja Morant, as that 27-year-old player, I think is the problem. And that's because the Grizzlies don't have faith in projecting that out in terms of what he will be on the floor and their comfort level in paying him when you project it out. He has 2 years left on the current contract. And not only is he not a reliable all-star, all-NBA player now, or at least for the last 3 or 4 years, in order to have comfort with him on that timeline, you have to believe not only can he be that, this season, next season, but he can be that at age 30, 31, 32 when, when the rest of your team is ready and you're giving him another contract. And there are players around the league who you would have that faith in, projecting that out into their late 20s, early 30s. He is not one of those players for this team. And that's why it's a timeline problem. And from the second they decided 2 things. One, we don't think we can win big right now with Ja Morant as our core signature player. We've tried for 4 years. It hasn't worked for 4 years. We no longer have. And then B, they decided, relatedly, we're just not going to get comfortable extending this contract or giving him a new contract after this one. Once those 2 decisions were made, it was done. And now you're just waiting for the final pieces. But I think your point is correct that there's a possibility for Ja to have the comeback tour we were hoping the last 2 or 3 seasons would have been. That could still happen for him somewhere else. And if it does, there will be, at least among fans, there'll be some regret. That's a reason why there are some other teams around the league that are probably undervaluing Morant and should probably be more interested in trying to trade for him because he will be he'll be motivated because he has to earn the next contract. It's not going to be given to him. He's going to have to earn it. And B, I do think there's enough talent still there for him to have all-star caliber seasons left. I just think the Grizzlies can't have faith in that beyond this current contract, and they've been spinning their wheels with it for 4 years, and it's just not healthy to keep risking that. And that's another word Zach Kleiman used, right? It was healthier for the organization to turn the page as much as we could at this trade deadline. And it's just healthier for the Grizzlies to move forward at this point. Yeah. They just have to find a way to do it.
Well, timelines are a thing in the NBA, right?
Yeah.
And there's a reason why a team like the Lakers in 2020 would try to put a bunch of veterans around an aging star like LeBron James. The same way that teams also try to line up their, timelines with younger teams as well. It's why not very often do you see a team go young around an aging star. That just doesn't happen all the time, and there's not a long history of success with that. I would kind of point to the types, like when Utah blew it up with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, that was a team that they had felt like hit the ceiling. It didn't mean that Donovan Mitchell was a bad player. He went to the Cavs and he was awesome. But it didn't make sense for the Jazz to keep hitting that ceiling when they were trying to strive for something that was more than that. And I think to win a championship, you have to have an elite level star, and you have to have your role players and everybody sort of at their best all at the same time. That's typically how you win a championship in the NBA. And so to keep Ja, you'd be putting faith in the fact that approaching, you got to give these young players a couple of years to develop and get better. They're going to be on the upswing. You got to have faith that Ja's not going to be on the decline, that he might still be on the incline, and that he is a championship level star if you're going to pay him a max contract. That's it.
That's just the point I make. It's the player, not the age in of itself. If a 29-year-old Ja Morant was the same as a 29-year-old LeBron James, you'd be fine with that, right? You'd be fine waiting for that and building around that. But they're just not. They've moved on. It's agonizing in the media and in the fans and social media and all the rest. They're not agonizing about it at the Grizzlies offices. They've already made that decision. They're just trying to find a way to execute it at this point.
I'm always open to counterpoints. There was one comment under the column that basically was advocating for why you should keep him. And essentially the point was that, players that have left Memphis that have had an injury history, pointed out Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard, have also played a ton, and that not every injured player who leaves Memphis has, it doesn't mean that they're going to continue to miss games, essentially. He said Ja can't play 60-plus games in the season for the To assume that Ja can't play 60-plus games in a season for the rest of his career is naive. His last 20 games of 24-25 season were statistically amazing. Paired with Edey, he can be everything he once was and more. Last season, they played 6 minutes together total. Put him, Edey, Boozer, and Coward, and he will raise the team's standard by several levels. Unlike Jaren and Bane, Ja thrives in the playoffs and is also clearly reflected in his numbers. He has one of the best game-winning shot percentages of all time, yada, yada, yada. And then also pointed out that there's a lot of Ja fans in Memphis and that he sells tickets and jerseys and he's a superstar who wants to be here, and that's not something that has always happened. What do you make of some of these counterpoints that typically come up, and it's kind of all laid out here?
It's not just about whether you believe he'll be healthy. The evidence of the recent past is no, but that could change. Like I just said, I think it's possible for him to have all-star caliber seasons in him going forward. It's a matter of, it's also the contract thing. It is, do you believe, even if like he's going to be healthy, right? Is he going to be a happy, productive member of this team with what it wants to do going forward? Without a contract extension? Is there any way you're going to be comfortable, given what's happened to this point, in giving him a contract extension? And if you won't give him the extension and he's not going to be happy without the extension, and you're building a team that you can't plan 5 years out anymore in the NBA, but you can plan 2 or 3, and this is a team that's not going to peak this season. It goes back to the timeline question, right? And again, the timeline question to me is not strictly a question of age. I don't think there's that big of a difference between Ja Morant and Zach Edey age-wise, a couple years. But it's about where your team is set up, when the direction your team is on, and whether Morant matches that direction, both as a player and as a contract, in terms of a contract, in terms of in terms of just general difficulty as a personality and a person within your organization. It just, again, this is something we're agonized about on podcasts and in the comments and among fans. The decision was made. They just have to execute it.
What do you make of his trade value right now, and what are your expectations for what could come?
I mean, they made him available at the deadline and they couldn't move him. At least they couldn't move him for a deal that they were comfortable doing. And I think, frankly, I don't know this, but I think their comfort level was pretty high in terms of doing something. Like, I don't think it would have taken a lot, and they couldn't find even enough to clear the bar they were trying to clear. Around the league, there's not really a lot of talk about, there's social media posts of people trying to get clicks, but there's not real talk among really connected people about Ja Morant trades and landing spots. There's not a lot of that going on right now. You start reading stuff people put up about the offseason on real sites like ESPN or Athletic or whatever. There's not a lot of Ja Morant stuff there. You listen to podcasts of people who know the league very well and are talking about different teams and gaming out their off seasons. Not a lot of speculation about Ja Morant in those. The aggregator sites and the sites making up stuff for clicks, they'll throw Ja Morant out there. There's not a lot out there. And so I don't know. It only takes one to do a deal. It only takes two to create a market. And so I do think that a couple of things have happened that might change the landscape in favor of a trade relative to the deadline. One of those is that there are teams that were good then and thought they were going to be good in the playoffs and didn't want to disrupt something that was good, and then they had a disappointing end to the season. You can point to Minnesota, you can point to Houston, you can point to Detroit. There are other teams like that. Orlando. There are teams out there that fell short of their expectations, and now they're looking at their team and thinking, what can we do to give ourselves a better shot next season? And maybe the calculus changes for some of those teams. On the other end of the spectrum, there are teams that, weren't good last year and maybe aren't set up to be good next year, but now there's no value in being bad because of the lottery reform. And so why not bring in a player who can help you get better? Because that's not going to hurt your draft pick getting better and can be exciting. You're buying low and you're taking a swing. Teams like Sacramento or Chicago or Brooklyn, right? So I think the disappointment that some good teams had and the lottery reform that removes the incentive for losing, both of those things could open up the market enough to help you find a landing spot. That would be the hope.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that, and I share some of your frustrations with some of the internet stuff. I mean, it's frustrating that we've gotten to a point now where it can be reported by every serious outlet the Grizzlies are going to try to trade Ja Morant, and then that can just be used as a guessing game, to get attention. It's like that's I share that frustration with you. I also share a lot of what you.
Well, I mean, guessing game is part of what I did in the column I wrote, but I was very clear that that's what it is, right? I'm not reporting these are not trade rumors, right? These are me trying to imagine frameworks of what could be possible.
Yes. No, that is definitely the case. Did you have a favorite of the trades that were possible that you put out? Let's not spoil the whole column. You can go read it at the Daily Memphian.
But a quick note on the column I wrote, and I sort of wrote it, I transitioned it this way, acknowledging this. The column's long. It's 3,000 words. 2,000 words of that are what I call trade frameworks with 15 different teams. But the first 1,000 words is not that. The first 1,000 words are about the logic of the situation in terms of what the value is and the mechanisms that might go into that and what the expectations should be. I think if you're listening to this podcast, hopefully you've already read it all and maybe you'd want to read it all. But even for more general Grizzlies fans, read the first third and then you can skip the made up trade frameworks if you don't want to get into that. In terms of the frameworks, and again, I call them frameworks because I'm not working out the edges of made up trades. I am not thinking about a little bit, but I'm not certainly going to write you trade this pick in this year with this protection on it and you negotiate around. I'm not doing all of that. I'm coming up with sort of framework starting points. What are teams that could theoretically have some interest in Morant, and what is the starting point of a trade in terms of the salary rules? And then you can build out from there. I had Sacramento, and I don't have the column in front of me, but I did power rank the teams at the end. And I had Sacramento 1, I'm pretty sure, because they are the one team we know, based on a leak last season, they're the one team we know made an offer for Ja Morant. It was not an offer the Grizzlies wanted to take, but they did make an offer. And the fact that they made an offer, I had to put them at number one, even though they got the 7th pick in the draft, where people think they'll take a point guard. I still would have them number one. But then after that, Miami's a team I would look at if they don't get Giannis. I think they're going to try to do something. And if they don't get Giannis, maybe Ja's the backup plan. And then I think Chicago's a team that should really take a hard look at this. So those are I don't remember whether those were my top three, but they should have been.
Where does Phoenix fall?
Are they interested, right? If Phoenix is interested, that's an easy deal to do. It makes a lot of sense. That's a team that, they have Devin Booker. They're trying to win with Devin Booker. So they're trying to win right now. At point guard, they played basically Devin Booker at point guard for a lot of the season. They also have this guy, Colin Gillespie, who was a good find, who was a good player. He's a free agent. They might need to re-sign him, but is he really your starting point guard? Is he more your backup point guard? They have a roughly matching salary in Jalen Green they can send back. So there's a Jalen Green, Ja Morant deal that is there that would be pretty easy to do. I don't personally think the Grizzlies would be super excited to add Jalen Green, even though he's young and he's talented. He's one of these guys whose real impact on basketball is far below his scoring average. And I think the Grizzlies are a team that sort of perceives that gap. I don't know if he's the kind of player that they feel like fits their rebuild. But maybe he goes to a third team and you're doing something else. Even if he doesn't, it's a smaller contract. I think if Phoenix were interested in Ja Morant, there's a deal there to be done, if they're interested.
You did at the end of this column, you kind of ranked the destinations based on reasonableness. And it was kind of interesting that, like, you have 15 teams here. And, like, the top 7, there's some playoff teams in there, but it mostly goes teams that are bad that are going to try to get better, and then towards the bottom, the teams that have been in the playoffs, beyond the first round of the playoffs, that might be trying to put themselves over the top.
Yeah, it's a bigger risk for teams that are already good. And also teams that are already good tend to have higher payrolls, which makes it also trickier. That's another part of it. And so I think you have to have a real incentive to take a swing if you're one of those teams to do a Morant deal. That's why I'm skeptical of the Minnesota thing. I think it's too big of a risk for them, as good as they already are. I'm skeptical of the Detroit thing. I think both those teams need to do something significant with their rosters, but I don't think Morant is going to be what it is, right? And so I think it's more likely to have a team in the middle like Phoenix or Miami, or a team that's more the lower end, where there's less risk, like now, especially since tanking doesn't matter, like a Brooklyn or Chicago or Sacramento. I think it's more likely to be one of those two category of teams than one of the contenders.
So what are the weird scenarios that exist here? A 3-team deal makes almost anything possible, correct? Like what could you not sort of lay out?
Typically when I've done speculative trade scenarios, I've shied away from the 3-team deals because, even if you're trying to be as reasonable as possible, 99% of the trades you think of won't happen. I have done a couple in the past that did happen, but 99% of them are not going to happen. And when you start doing 3-team deals and stuff like that, it's even less likely. The problem here is that I think a Morant situation really lends itself to the chance of a 3-team deal, because the Grizzlies are almost certainly, unless they're dealing with Chicago or Brooklyn, going to take back some significant contract. And in a lot of situations, it won't be a contract of a player they necessarily want, right? I don't know if they want a Jalen Green if it's with Phoenix. I don't know if they want a Julius Randle if it were with Minnesota. I don't know if they even want a Tyler Hero if it was with Miami, although I think that's more manageable. Maybe you'd keep a Tyler Hero, but you'd also probably look around, like, who wants Tyler Hero? What can we get, right? So I think there's a good chance that it becomes a 3-team deal. The juiciest stuff I thought of that I did not put in the column was stuff around Giannis trades. Like I did spend a lot of time thinking, how could Ja fit into a Giannis trade? And I came up with 3 of those. One of those would pair Giannis and Ja together in Miami in a 3-team deal. Like that, you could make that happen. One would pair Ja and Giannis together in Orlando in a 3-team trade. You can definitely make that happen. And then I had another that would pair Ja with Evan Mobley together in Milwaukee in a 3-team trade that was in Giannis to Cleveland. And so, like, stuff like that can happen. Like, I penciled it out, and it's not just, and it's stuff that you could, not only can I pencil it out, I can make the argument for why each of the 3 teams in those scenarios would potentially do that, but it's still wildly unlikely.
if we're talking juicy, could like Ja be tossed into a LeBron sign and trade because LeBron wants to go to some other team and they don't have space to take him?
I didn't game out that. When I looked at the Lakers stuff, which I had 15th on the list of 15 teams, when I looked at that, the thing that felt most would be a scenario where Austin Reeves is going to opt into unrestricted free agency almost certainly. Be a situation where the Lakers, for whatever reason, decided they didn't want to do a 4 or 5 year big deal with Austin Reeves, and or Austin Reeves decided, you know what, I'd kind of like to go and be the number one backcourt guy on a team, and maybe I would rather go to Memphis to play with Cam Boozer and Cedric Howard than to go to Chicago or Brooklyn, who could just sign me outright. And maybe that ends up with some sign and trade that would send Ja to the Lakers, and then Ja let the Grizzlies take back some other bad contracts. Maybe they send a draft pick. I don't know. I think that is more likely than Ja being involved in a LeBron trade. But I didn't game those out. I'm certain you could game some scenarios like that out.
Okay, onward. Let's move to your top 35 in the draft. At the top 3, you had Cam Boozer first. You had Darren Peterson second and AJ Debinsa third. I think I agree with you. After all that time we spent where we were like, man, Caleb Wilson's really good, I think we both kind of came to a closing point where it would end up, being more of a top 3 than a top 4. But obviously Caleb Wilson has tremendous upside. First of all, why did you not include Caleb Wilson in your top 4?
I'm going to circle back and I'm going to do a draft follow-up column either later this week or probably more likely next week and sort of circle back to a few different topics. And this is one of the topics I think I'm going to circle back to. I tend to be a contrarian by nature, and I tend to be not comfortable with consensus, especially unexplored consensus. And I find myself being a little uncomfortable with the Cam Boozer consensus, especially since I am part of the Cam Boozer consensus. And at one point in the process, back in January, February, I thought I was going to have Caleb Wilson second on my board, like after Darren Peterson, right? And the more I got into it, that changed. And it changed for both because I got more positive on Boozer and I started to have more questions about Wilson. So the reason I ended up where I did, with Boozer, the more I watched, the more comfortable I got in the combination of strength, skill, and processing. A guy who can shoot that well and pass that well and process the game and is that strong. I just think that combination wins out in the NBA over athleticism. And you see it over and over again at different positions, whether it's Nikola Jokic at center or Luka Doncic at point guard, right? It's the same thing. They are stronger and more skilled and smarter about processing the game than everybody else. And all that stuff just means more than being athletic. So that's why I ended up higher on Boozer than maybe I thought I was going to end up. With Wilson, I ended up a little bit lower than I once thought, in part because, it's related. I think his skill level in terms of shooting, passing, relative to his size, which I think is more combo forward than power forward size. And so that combination of not being as advanced a shooter or playmaker, but being in a body that might, need to be a little bit more he's built more like AJ Debinsa than he is Cameron Boozer, he is not built like Kevin Garnett or those guys. So that's sort of where I got there. I'm a little uncomfortable with it. I'm starting to second guess myself a little bit and second guess other people, because I do think even though I had Wilson in a lower tier, it was still a tier along Keaton Wagler where I said, these guys could be the best player in the draft. I think more things have to go right for those guys. That the more uncertain things have to go right for those guys than I think have to go right for Boozer, Debinsa, and Peterson.
I think if I look at your top 3, the only hesitation that I have is this is let's just backtrack. This is how I feel about the top 3 players if I were to put them into one sentence sort of category. I think Boozer is going to be a good player with the potential to be a star. I think he's the safest of those top 3. I think Peterson is most likely to become a star player in the NBA of the 3, but has a little bit more downside. I think Debinsa has the potential to be the best player in the draft because of his position because he's and has an archetype that everyone desires in the league, and there's a combination there of skill and position. I also think of those top three has the highest potential to be a bust in the NBA. And so I think that's why you can kind of put them in any three order, in any order out of the three of them, because you're kind of getting something different from every single one of those players. If you're seeking the most popular, best archetype that you could possibly have in the NBA, which is a big wing who can play point guard and can do everything for you and can play both sides of the ball, Dembélé has the potential to be that, which is why he'll probably go number one overall. I think Peterson is so skilled that he has the potential to be an elite scorer in the NBA. And I think Boozer does a little bit of everything. So because of that, he's probably not going to be a bust. He's going to be a good player, and he has the potential to be a star. But he doesn't necessarily he probably won't be that elite level scorer that Peterson could potentially be, and he probably won't be the positional archetype that everybody desires and what Dembélé has with his physical tools. Do you disagree or agree with most of that thinking?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I know those three players in a tier. I call them all, I think, the worthy number ones, right? I think you can make a real case for all those players. With Dembélé, I share, the concern. I brought up the Andrew Wiggins comp, right? Andrew Wiggins was number one overall pick. He was a guy who's considered like a future NBA star, coming out of high school. And he's been a good NBA player, right? He may have been the best player on the floor when the Warriors won their last title in the NBA Finals. He's a really good player, but there's a little level of feel and skill that just wasn't quite there with him. That's kept him from being a true star. I think Dembélé is more skilled than Wiggins was coming out of college, but Wiggins was the number one overall pick, right? And so I worry a little bit about the feel stuff with Dembélé and the motor stuff with Dembélé. The lack of defensive activity stuff in college kind of still nags at me a little bit. But I still had him in the tier of like guys who I think would be worthy number one overall picks.
You move on to your second tier. You've got Caleb Wilson and Keaton Wagler together as a duo in tier 2. I already asked you why Wilson wasn't in the top tier. Why is Wagler in the second tier for you?
He's just a guy I've had a thing for since the first time I saw him play. And I think there's downside risk with him because of some of the athleticism stuff. But I just think he has his combination of pro-level shot making as a long-range shooter, off the dribble, pull-up, NBA range, like it's all there, step backs, the whole shebang. His shooting package with his size, it's a legit 6'5", probably 6'6" in shoes, and his just feel for the game, his composure and his pace. There's just something about him. I've watched him a lot in real games, like not highlights. I probably watched 10 Illinois games this year. I just think there's something about him that, to me, if it all clicks, he could be, in that Tyrese Halliburton. He gets compared to him a lot, but that kind of like just a guy who's feel for the game and shot making just really pops in the NBA. I think that's potentially there with him.
Yeah, I would agree. I think he is the highest upside guard in part because he's taller. And obviously the scoring numbers were great. I like that he's a little bit of a late bloomer here. He wasn't like a touted high school recruit and kind of came out of nowhere. I think that could mean that more improvement is on the way and he's going to become a great NBA player. And so I agree. I don't know if I might have Wilson in his own tier before I get to Wagler and the rest of those guards, but I can see why you would like him the most of the guards.
I liked it better when like the world had Wagler at like 9-10.
Yeah.
than I do now, where like, because I said on our pod with the part we did with Parker like months ago, I said I would have Wagler 5th. I ended up keeping him there, but like that was not consensus back then. I'm a little uncomfortable with that consensus too, honestly.
Okay, we won't do every tier, but the next tier you have the rest of the guards that are considered.
Yeah. We need to make sure we get to some of these reader questions.
Yes, we
listener
will.
questions.
Acuff, Burries, Flemings, Michael Brown, and Ade Mara, who's the center out of Michigan, in the third tier. I don't know if I would order those guards in that exact order, but I think I mostly agree with the tier. I think Mara's going to be really interesting for a lot of teams because he's 7'3", can block shots and pass, and is very skilled. And so I think that will be appealing to a team, especially Western Conference teams that are going to have to deal with Wemby for a long time. And so I mostly agree with your tier 3 here. I will have a story. It's not published yet. Should be coming out pretty soon, in which I talked about not players that I like that could go to the Grizzlies, but players that if the Grizzlies were to draft them, I'd be like, huh, okay, wow, that's a little surprising. Or I can see it, but there's questions that surround it. And two of the names that I addressed were potential trade up and go get a guard targets, and they were Michael Brown and Kingston Flemings. I think of those guards, they would come with the most questions attached to them, but for very different reasons, right?
Yeah.
If the Grizzlies were to draft a player like Michael Brown, it'd be like, huh, this is a little bit of a departure from the type of players that they've selected a lot in the top, 25 of the last few years, because this is a freshman out of high school who was a really highly touted recruit, but did not really have an efficient season at Louisville, had some games where he blew up and the skill pops, but doesn't necessarily align with, some of the picks that they've made in the past, the David Roddy, efficiency, Xavier Tillman efficiency, those types of players, and Jake LaRavia, all of those were like high efficiency players.
I read something over the weekend that's related to this, and I'd forgotten, or maybe I didn't remember. It was about last year's draft, and it was about Cedric Coward. And I think we think because the Grizzlies went up and got Coward, and because he had a 72% true shooting percentage or whatever, and in his college career, which was very few games against high level competition, we think about him as a certain kind of prospect. But the thing I read pointed out that he was one of the bigger discrepancies between stats-based draft boards and scouting-based traditional scouting-based draft boards, that he was higher on the scouting boards than the stat boards.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And, actually the numbers line up pretty similarly with another player that I put on the list, which is Allen Graves, between Coward and Graves, who both were in very similar positions. But Graves would be interesting because if they have already drafted Boozer, he doesn't feel like a player that they would take, but maybe. So he was one of the players that I was like, that would be really interesting to go back real quick. And then there's Kingston Flemings, who might be the last of those guards drafted. I think if on most mocks he probably is, and that's probably because of his size. And the Grizzlies have already dealt with undersized guards that they're trying to make work in a defensive lineup. If they really were to believe in Kingston Flemings and spend assets to go up and get him, I might be a little surprised, but that would suggest that they think he's probably one of the best of those guards, that group of guards. And he would be a fascinating choice if it were to be him for that reason to me. Are there any players that stand out to you as like, wow, if they were to pick him, I would be pretty surprised, but maybe he'll turn out to be a good player?
I think when the Grizzlies popped up to that pick at 3, an immediate thought a lot of people had was that, maybe trade it up for 16, because originally people were really focused on the guards in the middle of the lottery for that Grizzlies first pick. So once they popped up to 3, people started thinking about, could you trade up from 16 into that guard group? I've expressed skepticism. I'll express it again about them trading into the 5, 6, 7 range. I think that's probably steep. So I'm interested in which of these guards we're talking about fall to the 8, 9, 10, maybe 11, range. And are the Grizzlies interested enough to try to trade up for one of those, right? I think Kingston Flemings is among the more likely to be in that range. I think Michael Brown certainly could be. I think Braden Burries more than likely is, or a lot of people have him going 9 to Dallas. And so are the Grizzlies motivated enough to trade up for one of those guards that falls into that range? On one hand, you look at their team projecting out forward and you don't see the centerpiece of the backcourt if you assume they're taking, say, Boozer or Wilson at 3 instead of Peterson. On the other hand, they have a lot of guards. And another thing Kleiman said, this was at the closing media session after the season, he said, we need to get bigger and more physical, which is not, I don't think Kingston Flemings fits that mold necessarily. I don't know if any of those guards do. So I'll be interested in that. I mean, the trade up guy I wondered about is Burries, and I have been higher on Burries for the most part than the consensus in the process. I have no idea how the Grizzlies feel about him, but that's a guy I wonder about. He is a little bit bigger and more physical.
So there's nobody that you think would be a stunner to you if that could fall in the Grizzlies' range where you'd be really surprised.
I'd be stunned if they trade up for a Daimara. I
Yeah.
mean, who's a guy I like a lot. I actually would like for the Grizzlies, but I don't see them trading up. You brought up Yaxel Lindeborg last week. I think is the potential trade up guy. That's one that like I would be surprised by, but also like I don't know. I mean, I think the read on him is going to be really wide among different teams, and so that's one I'd be surprised by, but also it wouldn't. I do think it's in the realm of possible, at least.
The thing we don't talk about very much when it comes to this trade up scenario stuff is like that could also be totally dependent on how they feel about the guards that might actually be there at 16. Like, what if they feel really good about one of the guards that might be there at 16?
Right.
Then there's no need to trade up because it sounds like they're going to work out LeBaron Philon and Ibuka Okori, and Christian Anderson was just mocked to the Grizzlies in Sam Vecini's last mock draft. And so, there are guard options at 16. There probably will be multiple of those guys available. How do they feel about them? Do they feel like they are far enough behind that lead group that it would be worthwhile to spend the assets, or do they have those prospects rated similarly, and because of that, there's no need to spend assets to go up and get somebody? So, that's the thing that we kind of leave out. We just talk about the possibility of them trading up, but we don't really consider what if they really like some of those guys that are in the next group based on public opinion. The Grizzlies many, many times have gone against public opinion and surprised. I think when I did the exercise, like none of the players that they have drafted in the top 25 over the last, since 2018, except for their top 5 picks, have actually been mocked around the range where they selected them. Most of those players were mocked later on in the draft, and the Grizzlies took them earlier anyway. So it would not be surprising to me if that's how the Grizzlies feel about one of those point guards, and they just decide to sit because they think one of those guards is just as good as those guys in the top 5. We'll see what happens. Let's get to the listener questions now, Chris. The first one is a in the weeds technical question as it relates to salary cap. Where do the Grizzlies need to be in terms of roster salary to be able to use the $28 million TPE and MLE on an incoming player? Favorite options on how to use the TPE?
I don't want to get into the weeds of. I may write about that at some point, but I don't want to get into the weeds of like specific players or whatever on that. The Grizzlies, and this is something I am going to write about this week. So the Grizzlies can choose whether to operate as an over the cap or under the cap team. They're in a position where they can navigate themselves to either of those paths. In order to use the traded player exception and in order to use the full mid-level exception, you have to operate as an over the cap team. You can't. So some people have done some math and said, "Oh, Grizzlies can have so and so in cap space." A lot of that you've seen is just leaving stuff out. It's leaving out dead money on the books. It's leaving out cap holds for the first round draft picks, etc. But there's a scenario where the Grizzlies could choose to be a cap space team and create a meaningful amount of cap space. But if you do that and you use cap space, you can't use the trade player exception. It disappears. That's why it's an exception. It's an exception that allows you to go over the cap. So if you're operating under the cap, you don't have it at all. You basically renounce it. It disappears. And to use the full mid-level exception, you have to operate over the cap. Because if you're operating under the cap, you have access to the smaller room exception, which is what they used last year to sign Ty Jerome. So if the Grizzlies want to have access to that traded player exception they got in the Jaren Jackson deal, which is $28.9 million, if they want to have access to the full mid-level exception, which I don't have the number in front of me, but it'll be like $14 million, something like that. If they want access to either of those things, they have to operate over the salary cap, and they can choose to do so. I believe they likely will choose to do so. As far as the trade player exception, without getting into specific players, I think it's more likely they take in a contract that another team is trying to get rid of and get paid to do so then that becomes a mechanism to go out and get some missing piece, great player.
Next question. In terms of most important days in Grizzlies franchise history, where will this year's draft day rank? Feels like an easily top 2 or 3 day with the pick at number 3, depth of the class to get an impact player at 16, potential for a Ja Morant trade. They have to nail it. There's actual basketball games that I'm not trying to be condescending here, but there's actual basketball games that get played. Like the Grizzlies did play in Western Conference Finals games once upon a time. Yeah. I would consider those to be a little bit bigger than this, but in terms of draft days, this is a pretty big draft for the franchise, no?
Yeah, I'm not good. I'm not a fan of, again, not to denigrate the question, because I welcome ranking. This would have been a better written mailbag question for me than a podcast question, because off the cuff, how would you rank? I'm not opposed to rankings and lists. I've made all kinds of rankings and lists over the years, not only about basketball, but about movies and music and food and all kinds of things. Listing and ranking is work, to actually, to sit down and actually think about it. And so I don't know. It's important. Is it the first, second, third, fourth? I don't know. But it's certainly a big day for the franchise.
Do you think Gigi actually has a role on the Grizzlies, or do you think he would be shipped out in a package with Ja Morant? I mean, I wouldn't rule out the fact that Gigi Jackson could get traded. I would not rule it completely out. I don't think there's very many players that would be off the table in trade talks for the Grizzlies right now. I would say on Gigi, I think they were hoping for more from him going into last season, defensively, in play style, and that sort of thing. He has really popped at times when the team hasn't been competitive, unfortunately. I think that they were encouraged by some of the progress he made, particularly defensively last season, so that puts him in a little bit of a better spot going into this season. But, I'm not sure that he's being considered the same way as a Zach Edey or Cedric Howard. I don't think that is the case, even though some of the statistics are good. So I think the door's open here for the Grizzlies to move forward with or without Gigi. I would probably guess that he's part of it. If he's not something that another team is asking for and someone that you need to include in a trade to get some sort of deal done that you like. If he is on the roster next season, I do think he's going to be a part of the rotation and part of the team. So that's kind of a difficult question to answer. What are your thoughts?
I do think that Gigi Jackson helped himself in the eyes of the Grizzlies organization last season with how well he pulled himself out of no man's land, really responded to Thomas Isolo's coaching and got himself back on track. And I think it was noticed, and I think he really helped himself. That said, I agree with you. I don't think he's in the same category of player as Cedric Howard or Zach Edey. And I'll briefly preview something I'm going to write about this week in the same sort of salary cap, oriented column we were talking about before with the traded player exception. The Grizzlies are entering a sort of a decision zone with a lot of players on the roster, where one thing they've been good about in the last few years is getting cost-effective contributors, getting players who are better than their contracts. Gigi Jackson, Cam Spencer, Scottie Pippen, Jalen Wells. There's a lot of these guys, right? Having those kind of players on the kind of contracts they're on, it's always a good thing. But it's a better thing when your team is expensive. It's what helps you afford, Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson all at the same time. When you're in the position the Grizzlies are going to be in this season and next season, where you got tons of salary flexibility, but not a lot of roster flexibility, it's not quite as valuable. And so I think and the need for that is going to come back around when you're talking about the next contract for Cedric Howard or Zach Edey or whoever you take at 3. So I think the Grizzlies are in a situation right now with all of those players where they need to be asking themselves, are we going to have this player on their next contract? And if we're not, and if we are, great. If we think we can get a contract we want on the next one. And if we're not, we probably need to be shopping these players now, because they will be more valuable to teams that are trying to contend and have really expensive rosters, right? Having Cam Spencer for $2 million means more when you're bumping up against the first apron than it does when you're under the salary cap. And so I think there's a lot of players like that they need to be asking themselves these questions about. Gigi is the most pressing because they have a team option for him this season, and then he would go into unrestricted free agency. So they really need to ask themselves that question about G.G. Jackson. But to me, it applies to Cam Spencer and Jalen Wells and Scottie Pippen and like Walter Clayton and all these dudes.
We should probably try to go speed around on some of these. One of the questions, can you explain why the Grizzlies need to trade Ja Morant this offseason?
We already did that. Let's skip to some non-Ja questions, because I think we mostly addressed the Ja stuff.
Yeah, the point was, would you get more value? We'll just do yes or no. Would you get more value for him if you waited till the trade deadline?
Maybe, but I just think they can't. Then you're spinning your wheels and you're waiting. They need to get on with their lives. It's been 4 years in a row of things not quite working out around a Ja Morant team. And now that they've decided to move forward, I just think they need to move forward if they can. And it can't, the when is the best time to maximize the trade value matters, but it can't be the only question here.
What former Grizzly would have been the perfect fit in their prime with this rebuild?
Great question, and I have an answer. Do you have one? Because I have a very clear answer on this.
Oh, man. See, I wasn't in Memphis for the grit and grind era. I know that there's going to be a grit and grind response here. I think maybe Zach Randolph would fit. No? Zach Randolph would fit with this team.
Oh, there's lots of good answers. I think Mike Conley would be a good answer. My answer is Pau Gasol. The most underappreciated Grizzly ever, Pau Gasol. Pau Gasol next to Zach Edey, between Zach Edey and Cedric Howard, would have been perfect. One of the biggest problems Pau Gasol had was he didn't have Zach Edey. He was getting bullied around all the time by Eric Dampier and Greg Ostertag and these dudes because the centers in his era were like Lorenzen Wright, who was a scrapper but undersized, and Stromae Swift, who was athletic but undersized. And like Pau was a power forward. And you put that skill and that his dynamic style next to a true bruiser like Zach Edey and let him an athlete like Howard. Pau, man. Pau's my answer.
You want to get real sneaky with this too, because it doesn't stipulate that the player has to be in their prime with the Grizzlies.
All right,
you could throw AI in there. Why don't we throw Allen Iverson in there? Yeah. Prime Allen Iverson with Zach Edey setting screens. That'd be great. Would you rather have two solid point guards, think Ja and Tyus, or point guard by association like we have right now?
Well, I mean, the right now is not by design; it's by accident. I don't think they want all these guards, right? They just sort of happen to have them. So I think what you want is a backcourt centerpiece, whether that's a true point guard like Ja Morant or it's if you had young Dwayne Wade, you'd take that, right? I think the idea you want a backcourt centerpiece. You don't want a backcourt by committee. I don't think that's an intent. I just think that's just the present general condition.
Third part, I'll take this one. If they were to draft Aaron Peterson, would he be the lead point guard on day one? My guess would be no. I think they would probably try to let him play minutes at the one, but my guess would be he would be a two guard, and that's the position that he probably fits the best. It's what he played at Kansas. And if Ty Jerome's on the roster, Scottie Pippen Jr., I think that would work well to have Peterson play two guard. Any expected coaching changes to Isolo's coaching staff this offseason? They did run with a thinner staff last year, so there's potential to add if the Grizzlies would like to. As far as like wholesale changes or anything, no, don't expect something like that. G.G. Jackson's future, we already addressed that. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope player option dates. When does he have to decide, and what should the Grizzlies do with his contract?
June 23rd is the date. The sun will rise that day, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope will exercise his player option for $22 million. Somebody reported that like 4 months ago. Quite a report. Yes, he'll exercise his player option for that money. As far as what the Grizzlies do, there's three different directions it could go, and I think they're all possible. It just depends on what happens around it, right? You certainly they'd be willing to move that contract out in a trade if they needed to, if it made sense, given that they have this big trade exception, like they have other mechanisms. I think they could keep him on the team into the season and then just have that big expiring contract. The problem is that they may have a roster crunch, and so it wouldn't shock me if they just bought him out, honestly.
What happens with Brandon Clark's contract? We've got a lot of questions about this. It wasn't appropriate to answer at first, but
at some point you have to, right? Because I mean, free agency will begin, and there will be numbers on the books or not on the books, and that will govern what a team can do. This is not official. This, at least to my knowledge, my operating assumption when I write a salary cap column this week, it will not have the Brandon Clark money as part of the calculation. So my operating assumption is that that contract will not be part of the cap figure for the Grizzlies next season.
I don't know if there's a good answer to this question. This comes from my friend Brian on Blue Sky, who asked, essentially, what do you think gets weighted the most in a pre-draft process for a team when trying to decide what player to select? So, like, do you think it's interviews? Do you think it's workouts? Do you think it's team need or team culture? Like, what do you think the Grizzlies are valuing the most? I don't know if I have a clear answer to that.
Well, I don't think it's team need right now because of where they are in a rebuild and because of how high the pick is. You're trying to come up with a tentpole player. And so I think it's whoever you think is the most likely to be a foundational player for a really good team. And I think all the rest of it comes into play at that point.
And then last one's from our friend Chase on Blue Sky. How would you guys approach team building as it relates to Edey, given the combination of his uniqueness as a player and mounting injuries?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I like that question. I think, and if you don't mind, I'll sort of go on that a little
bit.
Ahead. What's important here is that there are two pressure points with Zach Edey, and the Grizzlies aren't facing either of those. One would be positional, or are you facing the choice of adding a player in his position, and you have to calculate that? They're not, because the prospects at 3 is not really going to be a center. And even at 16, I don't think it's going to be that either. So they're not having to choose whether to draft over Edey or not over Edey, or to factor Edey into who they draft. They can just take best player, and it fits either way. And then the other pressure point would be contractual. He's still early enough in his rookie contract. They're not having to decide whether to pay him yet. And so absent those two pressure points, I think you can just build your team with the best players and hope for the best with Edey, and then be ready to react down the road. The counter to that would be, if you have doubts about Edey, do you try to trade him now? And I just think trading someone, given the injury history, you'd be trading at such a low value that it's smarter, unless they know things we don't, it's smarter to just hope for the best and work on his medical situation. And I think this is a more operable question maybe a year from now, but right now I don't think it needs to impact what they do at all.
I also think it's a great question, and I would just remind everyone of how great those 7 games were in the middle of the season. They were so good. He was unbelievable. 11 games.
Yeah.
He was unbelievable. And if I know the injuries exist, but if that's what you're going to get, why would you trade a player that can bring that to the table and be, as Chase points out, one of the unique forces in the NBA, which you kind of need to be competitive at a time when there's injury questions and the value wouldn't be the same. So I don't think. I think the Grizzlies just I think you're kind of forced into just believing that it's going to work out from an injury standpoint and trying to build around a player that's shown real promise. And again, just go look at those 11 games. Those 11 games were great. And then a few more. Opening night, will there be a signed lease? No lease, but lots of additional reporting, blah, 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 blah. Continued silence.
We don't know.
We can't say.
Yeah.
Can't say. And then last one, how does this draft compare to what we kind of knew it as in a more general sense now that we've kind of gotten into the players? I would say that that generally speaking, I think it does live up to the hype. The thing that struck me, we've talked a lot about these box plus minus and impact stats and stuff like that. I get it. They're not perfect. None of those things are perfect when trying to evaluate players. But if you just go year by year and see how many freshmen and sophomores have had a 10 plus box plus minus over the years, it is incredible to see the sheer number of players that are right there in that range this year versus previous years. I think last year there was like 2 freshmen. I think this year there's close to 9 or 10. So the depth, I think, just if you're going to go based on pure impact of the game and the level at which college freshmen were impacting college basketball last season, it's very clear to me that there's more young talent in this class than there has been in the last 5 years based on that. And so because of that, I kind of choose to believe that this draft is living up to the hype, or has lived up to what I had heard prior to getting into looking at these players.
So my read on this draft relative to sort of typical draft is that I think it's a really strong draft, picks say 2 through 20, which is good for the Grizzlies who are picking at 3 and 16. I think it's a strong draft, picks like 2 through 20. I think it's an average draft at pick number 1 because the bar is extremely high for a first overall pick, and whoever you take first in this draft, I think is more of an average number 1 overall pick. You know, at one point Jamal Mashburn said Cooper Flagg would go 5th in this draft. Cooper Flagg would go 1st in this draft, I believe. So I think it's average at 1. I think it's really strong 2 through 20. I think it gets pretty middling in the back end of the first round, and I think it's probably a below average draft in the second round at this point, which is not great for, picking 32.
Well, logically that makes a ton of sense, because if the talent is so strong in the lottery, you're going to have less players staying in the draft and more going back to school. And so it does kind of wipe out some of the back end of the draft talent. But I think through the lottery and through the top 20, really, it is very strong. I think that does it for listener questions. We did get one late one, which was, would you consider Wagler at 3 if Boozer's already gone? And I think that answer is no. I mean,
if we're assuming that means Peterson's at 3, you got to tell me how comfortable they are with Peterson. Because to me, that becomes a thumbs up, thumbs down. Are we comfortable with Darren Peterson question? It's not really about Peterson versus other players.
I mean, if there's one player that the Grizzlies really view as the guy that they want to get in this draft and he's not available at 3, instead of trying to take a reach on a guard, I mean, maybe you do entertain trading back. But I just feel like Peterson's talent level is undeniable, and that you would have to go with Peterson if he's indeed the guy that's still there instead of a player like Wagler. But I'm not saying it's not totally possible that Wagler could end up being the better player in the NBA, but I think as prospects, as you evaluate them, there's a reason that those two are separated. Last thing, the finals, real quick before we get out of here. The Knicks have a 2-0 lead, so you're well on your way to being correct in your prediction.
Oh, Drew, breaking news. We have a surprise guest on the pod. Karl Anthony Towns is here.
Oh,
he's taking a break between games. He's getting ready tonight. He's up from his nap. He is here. Karl Anthony Towns having a great series, halfway to a Finals MVP. Shout out, Kat.
Explain for the listener.
This is a Karl Anthony Towns, whatever these
Funko
are called.
Pop.
Funko Pop from his Minnesota days. This was actually given to me by Drew. I don't know if you even remember, years ago.
Yeah.
And I've had it on my shelf ever since. And so Kat, this is Karl Anthony Towns in a Wolves jersey, making a special appearance. Kat playing for the Knicks, having a great series.
I did give you that Karl Anthony Towns Funko Pop. Once upon a time, when Kat was on the Wolves, they were campaigning for him for some award. These teams campaign for awards, and so they send out like gift packages to people that they think might be voting to try to bribe the voting, which is, whatever. I would never vote based on something like that. And so somewhere in my house, I also have like a Karl Anthony Towns bucket hat. What a mistake by me not wearing that today. Should have worn that. But yeah, we do have Karl Anthony Towns on the podcast. I'm a little mad because I was going to take the Knicks. And
I took Knicks in 6. It might be 4.
You took the Knicks, and so I felt the need
my mayor is not Muslim, and my Christian is not the York, but my bagels are Jewish, and it might be Knicks in 4.
It might be Knicks in 4. The Knicks celebration videos are incredible, and they have been incredible over these last couple weeks. And so, I mean, we'll see what the scene looks like in Game 3. I don't know if you've seen the news. There seems to be some other stuff surrounding it.
In all kinds of ways, on the court and off. Must-see TV.
It will be must-see TV.
Game 3 tonight, yeah.
But I'm a little mad at you because I was going to take the Knicks. You took the Knicks. We have to go in opposite of each other a lot of the time on the pod. So
where you messed up was not one-upping me and saying Knicks in 5 or Knicks in 4.
That's what I should have done, but I didn't do it. And so now I have the Spurs in 7, which I don't think the series is all the way dead if San Antonio can get Game 3. By the way, the Wemby turnover late in Game 2 where he threw it off the back of Castle, whose fault was that? To me, I think some of the fault is with Castle. You're the point guard, dude. Look for the ball.
I agree. I mean, it's all three. If you're Wemby, you can't make that pass. You have to be able to recognize that he's not looking. But at the same time, like, he should have been looking, right? He should have had his eye on the ball. You could also say Mitch Johnson should have called a timeout. That's more debatable. That's easy to say after the fact. But I definitely think Castle should have been more aware in that situation too. Yeah.
I'm not trying to dunk on Stephon Castle, but I would just say that I think one of the things I've noticed this playoffs is, like, he's a great player who's going to get even better, but it is like all or nothing with him, it feels like at times. Yeah. He plays super hard, and he's either making a play or he's making a bad mistake. And some of the shot selection, with him, it comes and it goes. And so they need good Castle to get back into this series, it feels like. And it's just been so hit or miss. And, I mean, Julian Champagnie, take a bow. You've been great throughout the playoffs. Vassell has been solid, but they need more from Wemby, and they need a more consistent Castle if they have any chance at getting back in this. I mean, the Knicks won Game 1 with Mikal Bridges doing nothing. Like, they had obviously he played better in Game 2, but they had Wemby guarding Bridges because they were basically trying to make it to where he was going to be able to roam a little bit more. And then they switched that in Game 2, and they got beat because Wemby was out on the perimeter guarding Cat. So I don't know what the solution is for the Spurs in this series, but they have to get Game 3. What do you think they'll do?
I mean, both Knicks are up 2-0, and they won both games in San Antonio. Those games weren't routes. I know the first game ended up being a 10-point game, but, like, those were tight games that could have gone either way, and I think that remains the case going into New York, or certainly could, unless the Spurs wilt a little bit. That could be the case there. I think, as we've seen many times in the playoffs, there are unexpected injuries that shift things one way or the other. That tends to be a big deal. I'm also struck by just how physical those games were. Games 1 and 2. I thought they were fantastic to watch. I'm just really looking. I picked the Knicks to win, and I believed in that pick. I also kind of want the Knicks to win, just because I think that's probably better in a big picture from the NBA, and because I want to see Spike Lee in the championship parade. But for the most part, I don't have a heavy personal rooting interest in this. So it would probably be more fun for it to go 5, 6, 7 than to go in 4. But I'm just loving these games. I'm looking forward to seeing at least 2 more of them. And it will be a spectacle in all kinds of ways at Madison Square Garden tonight.
Yes, it will. I'm looking forward to watching it. There's more to life than basketball. Real quick, let me turn this hat around. If you're watching the pod, my Alabama Crimson Tide I think they're playing right now as we record, a game 2 innings away from the College World Series for the first time since 1999. So I watched that this weekend and hung out, grilled out. My baby had a little surgery. She's doing great, so that was good. Everything went well there. Was really happy with that. And then I'm going on vacation next week. Heck yeah. Or this week. In a couple days, I'm going on vacation, and I'll be back by the end of the week so we can record another pod, Chris. But that's what's happening in my life. How about you? How'd you spend your weekend?
I'm trying to remember. It feels like a year ago, even though it was yesterday. We did some yard work. I did play one-on-one. My son and I went down to the park and played. And we did some hooping yesterday.
There we go.
And we were playing to 11 by 1s, win by 2, make it, take it. That's how we tend to play. He got up on me 5-1. And then I got into a groove, and I ended up pulling it out and winning. And then I spent the rest of the day in full recuperation mode from that single game to 11. No. There was not a second game. There was one game. I did win. I still got touch around the basket. I still got, I still got moves in the post. My body doesn't always cooperate going off the dribble, but if I can get to a spot, I can make a shot. The shot's erratic. But I did pull it out.
For those who don't know, can you just tell people how old and tall your son is? I was shocked when I saw your son for the first time and I learned how old he is.
He is 16 years old. He is 6'6".
Yeah.
I got better touch. I got that old man soft touch, right? Now, a couple of times he stuck an elbow in me, and like I was like, fine, go to the basket. There's nothing I can do about this. But I did get into a rhythm and pull it out. My days are numbered pulling it out, but I was able to summon it yesterday and pull out the come from behind win.
I think I met your son when he was like 14, and he was already like 6'3" or something crazy. I mean, he was so tall, and I was like, that's a 14-year-old. I was shocked. So, yeah. In a I don't know. He's not a basketball player, right? He's a musician.
Yeah, and he's a film buff, and
There we go.
We went to a coffee shop to get some coffee, and we both brought books and we read, and then we went and hooped. And so like, this is my guy,
That's great. Like father, like son. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll be back next week, late in the week, talking NBA Finals, potentially Finals result if it's over by then. And we'll talk one more time about the draft before it takes place in New York City. So that will be a fun pod. We'll have to get everything planned out. Who knows? Maybe we might have a guest for that one. We'll just have to wait and see. But for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.